A CEO marries a poor waitress in a contract marriage, but what happens next will melt your heart. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain was coming down in heavy sheets over downtown Chicago, drumming against the windows of a quiet coffee shop that smelled faintly of roasted beans and wet pavement. At a corner table sat Eleanor Brooks, a woman whose silver hair and calm authority made people straighten the moment she spoke. Across from her sat Mark Davis, a 23-year-old law student whose eyes were tired, whose coat was too thin for the cold. He had not been inside a place this elegant in months. He held his cracked phone in one hand, a half-empty cup of coffee in the other, trying to understand why a billionaire widow had asked to meet him. Eleanor studied him for a moment before setting her cup down. Her voice was smooth, deliberate. "Mr. Davis, I know about your debts. The ones your late father left behind. The tuition notices. Your mother's medical bills." Mark blinked, unsure how to respond. How do you know about that?" She smiled faintly. "I have my ways. I also know you are running out of time." Her gaze didn't waver. "So I am offering you a solution. Marry me." The words hit him like thunder. For a moment, Mark thought he had misheard. The rain outside muffled everything except the pounding of his heartbeat. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice cracking. "You heard me," she replied, leaning slightly forward. "This is not about romance. It is a contract. You will be my husband for 1 year. I will clear all your debts, ensure your family's stability, and in return, you will stand by me." Mark laughed softly, half in disbelief, half in fear. "You do not even know me." Eleanor's eyes softened but stayed steady. "Exactly. That is why it can work. I am not looking for love, Mr. Davis. I am looking for an agreement." The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence. Mark stared down at his trembling hands, the cheap watch his mother had given him years ago catching the light. "Why me?" he whispered. "Because you are desperate enough to consider it," she said, her tone honest but not cruel. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, two strangers stared at each other across the table, a contract of convenience hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. He did not know it yet, but that one impossible offer was about to change both of their lives forever. The rain eased into a soft drizzle as Mark Davis left the coffee shop that night, his mind spinning. The word "marry" kept echoing in his head, chasing him through the empty streets of downtown Chicago. He could still see Eleanor Brooks sitting there, calm and confident, as if she had just offered him a job instead of a marriage. The streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement, reflecting his torn face. When he finally reached the small apartment he shared with his mother, the air smelled faintly of the soup she always made when she could afford vegetables. She looked pale but smiled when she saw him. "You are late again, Mark," she said gently, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred the pot. He set his backpack down and sat across from her. "Mom," he began slowly, "what if someone offered to help us, with everything? The bills, your treatments, my loans. But it came with a strange condition." She raised an eyebrow, worry creeping into her tired eyes. "What kind of condition?" He hesitated, unable to meet her gaze. "Marriage. A legal arrangement. No feelings involved." The spoon slipped from her fingers, clattering softly against the pot. "Marriage? To who?" "Eleanor Brooks," he said quietly. "The widow of Richard Brooks, the founder of Brooks Holdings." Silence filled the small kitchen. The only sound was the steady ticking of the wall clock. "She is rich," his mother said finally. "And old enough to be your employer." Mark nodded. She said it is not about love. She wants a companion, a partner in name only. In return, she will take care of everything. His mother looked down at her hands, thin and pale from years of work and illness. Mark, that sounds like a transaction, not a marriage. I know, he said. But I am running out of time. The hospital called again today. If we do not pay by next week, they will stop your treatments. She closed her eyes, her voice trembling. I do not want you to sacrifice your future for me. He reached across the table, taking her hand. You are my future. The next morning, Mark stood once again at Brooks' Bistro. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and cold. Eleanor sat in her usual seat, a tablet in hand, her posture impeccable. When she saw him approach, a faint smile crossed her lips. You have decided. It was not a question. Mark took a deep breath. I will do it. She nodded once, as if she had known all along. Good. The arrangements will begin immediately. The ceremony will be simple, private, and strictly legal. Her tone was businesslike, but there was a glimmer of something else, relief, maybe in her eyes. A week later, Mark found himself standing beside her in a small courthouse. The judge's voice was monotone as he read the vows. Do you, Mark Davis, take Eleanor Brooks to be your lawful wedded wife? Mark hesitated for a fraction of a second, then answered, I do. The words felt foreign on his tongue, yet strangely binding. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Eleanor extended her hand. Her grip was steady, almost reassuring. Welcome to your new life, Mr. Davis. Cameras flashed outside as they left the courthouse, reporters calling out questions, but Eleanor ignored them. A black sedan waited by the curb, its driver holding the door open. Mark slid in beside her, the smell of leather and perfume filling the car. As they drove through the city, he glanced at her reflection in the window. Her expression was unreadable, her gaze fixed ahead. He turned back to the skyline, unsure whether he had just saved his family or sold his soul. The city lights flickered across his face like fragments of another life, fading fast into the night. The iron gates of the Brooks estate creaked open as the black sedan rolled up the long driveway. Mark stared out the window in silence, his reflection flickering between the trees and the towering mansion ahead. The house looked more like a museum than a home, its columns tall and white, its windows glowing faintly against the gray afternoon sky. When the car stopped, Eleanor stepped out first, her heels clicking against the marble steps. Welcome to your new residence, Mr. Davis, she said, her tone calm but distant. Mark followed, gripping the handle of his worn suitcase. The air smelled of polished wood and roses. Inside, the foyer was vast, lit by a chandelier that seemed to hold 100 tiny suns. A housekeeper and 2 attendants appeared instantly, bowing slightly before taking his bag. Eleanor gestured toward the staircase. Your room is upstairs. Dinner is at 7. I trust you will find everything to your satisfaction. She spoke as if reading from a script, efficient and detached. Mark nodded, unsure what to say. The housekeeper led him through long corridors lined with portraits of the Brooks family's stern faces and sharp suits staring down at him like silent judges. His room was larger than his entire apartment back home. A king-sized bed stood in the center, draped in crisp linen. Heavy curtains framed tall windows that overlooked manicured gardens stretching to the horizon. Yet despite its beauty, the room felt cold, untouched by real life. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, his hands resting on his knees. The silence pressed in around him until a knock came at the door. It was Eleanor. She stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. I wanted to remind you, she said softly, this arrangement will be simple. You will attend events with me when needed. Publicly, we are a married couple. Privately, we respect each other's boundaries. There are separate rooms, of course. Mark nodded slowly. Understood. She studied him for a moment, her eyes softer than before. Do not look so nervous. You will get used to it. Then she turned and walked away, her perfume lingering faintly in the air. That evening, the long dining table felt like an ocean between them. Eleanor sat at the far end, elegant in a silk blouse and pearls. Mark tried to eat, but every clink of silverware echoed through the room. "You can speak, you know," she said finally, glancing up from her plate. "You look like you are on trial." He managed a weak smile. "I guess I am still trying to understand why me." She set her fork down gently. "Because you did not come here for money. You came for duty. That is rare." Her gaze softened just enough to make his chest tighten. "I respect that." After dinner, Mark wandered the halls, unable to sleep. The house was quiet except for the hum of distant thunder. He stopped by a window overlooking the gardens. Somewhere below, he saw Eleanor standing alone under the pergola, her face tilted toward the sky. The rain had started again, light and steady. For a moment, she looked fragile, nothing like the powerful woman he had met in the cafe. Then she turned, catching him watching. Their eyes met through the glass. She gave a small nod, not a smile, just acknowledgement, before disappearing into the darkness. Mark stood there long after she left, the rain tapping softly against the window pane. He had entered this marriage out of desperation, but something in her loneliness mirrored his own. And deep down, though he would never admit it, he wondered if behind the contract and the cold walls, there was still a heart waiting to be seen. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Brooks estate, spreading across the marble floors like liquid gold. It had been 3 days since the courthouse ceremony, and Mark was still learning how to breathe in this new world. The silence of the mansion was heavy, broken only by the ticking of antique clocks and the distant murmur of staff who avoided meeting his eyes. Eleanor treated him with flawless politeness but remained distant, speaking to him only when necessary. Every interaction felt rehearsed, as if she was carefully protecting something behind her composed smile. On the 4th morning, a knock came at his door. When he opened it, Eleanor stood there holding a folder. "You will need this," she said, handing it to him. Inside were schedules, media briefings, and a detailed list of social events he was expected to attend as her husband. "The first one is tomorrow night," she continued. "A charity gala at the Brooks Foundation. The press will be there. You must remember, this marriage must look real." Mark studied her face, searching for any hint of warmth. "And what happens if I fail to play the part?" he asked quietly. She met his eyes without hesitation. "Then the world will see through both of us." Her answer carried no threat, only truth. The next evening, the mansion was a flurry of preparation. Stylists, assistants, and photographers moved like clockwork. Mark had never worn a custom tuxedo before. The fabric felt foreign, too perfect. When he caught sight of himself in the mirror, he almost did not recognize the man staring back. Downstairs, Eleanor appeared at the top of the staircase in a navy gown that shimmered under the chandelier. For a moment, the entire room seemed to pause. Mark forgot to breathe. She looked regal, untouchable, yet when she reached him, her perfume jasmine and rain felt disarmingly human. "Ready?" she asked, her tone calm but softer than usual. He nodded, offering his arm. She hesitated before taking it, a small but deliberate gesture. Cameras flashed as they entered the gala hall. Elegant guests turned to stare, whispers rippling through the crowd. Mark could feel their judgment, the unspoken question, what was a young man like him doing with a woman like her? Eleanor leaned closer, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "Smile, Mr. Davis. They are watching." He obeyed, but the muscles in his face felt tight. As the night unfolded, Mark followed her lead through endless introductions, toasts, and photo sessions. Yet beneath the polished surface, tension lingered. During a break, he stepped out to the balcony, needing air. The city stretched below in a blur of lights. A few moments later, Eleanor joined him, her expression unreadable. "You handled yourself well," she said. "I know this is not easy." "It is not," he admitted. "But I will keep my promise." A faint breeze lifted a strand of her hair, and without thinking, he reached to brush it back. She froze, startled, then stepped back slightly. "We should go inside," she said, her voice suddenly formal again. The warmth between them vanished like mist. Back inside, a reporter approached, smiling too widely. "Mrs. Brooks, may I ask a personal question? You and your husband make quite the pair. Was it love at first sight?" Eleanor's hand tightened around her champagne glass. Mark felt her pause for a second, then she smiled for the cameras. "Sometimes love does not arrive at first sight," she said smoothly. "Sometimes it grows from respect." The crowd applauded her grace, but Mark could hear the tremor behind her words. Later that night, when the lights dimmed and the last guest left, Eleanor stood by the grand piano, her fingers resting on the polished keys. "You did well," she said quietly. "Good night, Mr. Davis." Then she turned and disappeared up the staircase, leaving Mark alone in the glow of the chandeliers, wondering how long two strangers could pretend to be married before the act began to feel real. The weeks that followed the gala blurred into a rhythm of appearances, charity events, and quiet dinners that felt more like meetings than meals. Mark played his part well, always polite, always standing 2 steps behind Eleanor, always aware of the hundreds of eyes that followed them. But beneath the surface, something unspoken began to shift. One rainy afternoon, he found her in the library, seated by the window with a cup of tea. The storm outside mirrored the tension that had been building between them. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" he asked quietly. Eleanor did not look up immediately. "Pretending is what keeps people comfortable, Mr. Davis. They believe what they want to see." Her tone was calm, but there was a sadness in her voice that caught him off guard. "And what do you see?" he asked. She looked at him then, her blue eyes soft but distant. "Someone who has not decided if he regrets saying yes." Mark did not know how to answer. Instead, he noticed the small details of the room, the half-finished book on her lap, the way her fingers traced the rim of her teacup. For the first time, he saw her not as the untouchable widow, but as a woman who carried loneliness like a second skin. Later that week, they attended a board meeting at Brooks Holdings. The conference room was filled with senior executives, most of whom looked at Mark with thinly veiled disdain. One man, Harold Grant, smirked openly. "Mrs. Brooks, I did not realize your husband was joining us. Does he have experience in corporate finance, or is this social support?" The room went silent. Mark's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Eleanor placed a hand on his arm. Her smile was cold, but her words were sharp. "My husband understands integrity, Mr. Grant. Something that cannot be listed on a resume." The subtle sting drew a few chuckles around the table. Harold flushed and looked away. After the meeting, Mark stopped her by the elevator. "You did not have to defend me," he said. "Yes, I did," she replied simply. "You are my husband. At least in public, I protect what is mine." The elevator doors opened, but neither of them moved. For the first time, their silence felt less like distance and more like an understanding neither dared to name. That evening, Eleanor surprised him by inviting him to join her in the garden. The air smelled of rain and jasmine. "I used to come here with Richard," she said softly. "We planned every tree, every flower. After he died, I stopped coming. It felt wrong without him." Mark listened quietly, unsure what to say. She turned to him, her expression open, unguarded. "You asked me once why I chose you. The truth is, I wanted someone who would not treat me like a broken relic of my past." Her honesty disarmed him. "You are not broken," he said. "You just forgot how to start over." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fountain trickled nearby, the moonlight touching her face. She looked at him, almost smiling. "And what about you, Mr. Davis? Have you?" "I am trying," he said. "Maybe this arrangement is forcing me to." Eleanor's gaze lingered on him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then perhaps we are both learning." As they stood there, the distance between them felt smaller than ever, and for the first time since that stormy night at the coffee shop, Mark felt something new, something dangerously close to hope. But neither of them noticed the shadow moving near the terrace, a figure watching from afar, phone camera raised, ready to turn their fragile connection into tomorrow's scandal. The photograph hit the internet the next morning. A grainy image of Eleanor and Mark standing close in the garden, her hand resting gently on his sleeve, his gaze soft and unguarded. The caption read, "Widow billionaire's secret romance or business deal?" Within hours, it spread through news sites and social media. Reporters gathered outside the Brooks estate, their cameras flashing through the gates like lightning. Mark woke to the sound of voices shouting his name. When he came downstairs, Eleanor was already in the study, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice composed but clipped. "Yes, handle it. No statements until I approve them." She ended the call and looked at him, calm but tired. "It seems someone wanted to turn our private life into entertainment." Mark rubbed his forehead. It was probably someone from the staff or the event. "I am sorry, Eleanor. I should have been more careful." She shook her head. "Do not apologize, scandals come with the Brooks name. You will get used to it." But her eyes betrayed a flicker of hurt. The rest of the day passed under siege. Reporters camped outside, investors demanded explanations, and the board called an emergency meeting. When Eleanor walked into the conference room, every face turned toward her. Harold Grant smirked again, holding up a printed copy of the photo. "Care to explain this, Mrs. Brooks? It looks like our company is funding a soap opera." A few executives chuckled. Eleanor's posture remained regal. "My personal life does not affect Brooks Holdings' performance, Mr. Grant. But your disrespect might." Her calm tone silenced the room. Mark sat beside her, feeling both proud and helpless. After the meeting, as they stepped into the elevator, she leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for a brief moment. "They think this marriage is a joke," she said quietly. "I knew this would happen. I should not have let them see you as vulnerable." Mark turned toward her. "You cannot control what people believe. You just have to decide what you believe." She opened her eyes, studying him. "And what do you believe, Mr. Davis?" He hesitated. "I believe that somewhere between pretending and reality, something real started." For the first time, her composure faltered. She looked away, her voice soft. "Do not say things you cannot take back." "I mean it," he said. "Maybe this began as a deal, but every day I spend here, it feels less like a contract and more like fate." She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "You are young. You still think fate is romantic. I know it is just timing and consequences." But her eyes glistened in the dim elevator light. That evening, the storm outside returned. Mark found her on the balcony, watching the rain fall across the city. He stepped closer, uncertain if she wanted him there. She did not turn around when she spoke. "When Richard died, I built walls around my life. People called it strength. It was just fear." Mark's voice was quiet. "Maybe walls are necessary until someone gives you a reason to take them down." She turned to face him, the rain streaking across the glass behind her. "And you think you are that reason?" He held her gaze, steady. "I do not know. But I would like to try." For a heartbeat, the world was silent except for the rain. Then she whispered, "Be careful, Mark. Trying to love me will cost you more than money." Before he could respond, the door opened behind them. The butler appeared, uneasy. "Mrs. Brooks, there is a reporter on the phone. They claim to have more photos. They are threatening to release them unless we comment." Eleanor's calm expression returned, her voice sharp again. "Tell them no comment. Let them print what they want." As she walked past Mark, her shoulder brushed his lightly. "Do not worry. This is just another storm. And like all storms, it will pass. But deep inside, both of them knew that this one was different, and when it passed, nothing between them would ever be the same. By the end of that week, the whispers had turned into headlines. Every magazine cover carried their faces, spinning stories of betrayal, power, and manipulation. Eleanor faced it all with her usual calm, but Mark could see the exhaustion behind her perfect posture. One morning, she called him into her study. The air felt heavy, the curtains drawn to keep out the reporters' cameras. On her desk lay a folder thin, but decisive. "It is time we end this," she said quietly. Mark froze. "And what?" "The arrangement," she replied, her voice steady but brittle. "The board is threatening to remove me. They claim I have compromised the company. I cannot let that happen." He shook his head, disbelief clouding his voice. "You think ending this marriage will silence them?" "It will control the damage," she said. "You will receive what I promised. Your debts are cleared. Your family is safe. You owe me nothing more." Her words were formal, distant, like she was closing a business deal, not breaking something fragile and human. Mark's heart pounded. "You are making this decision out of fear," he said. "I am making it out of responsibility," she corrected. "This was never meant to be real, Mark. You knew that." He took a step closer, his voice lower now. "Maybe it was never meant to be, but it became real. You can deny it all you want, but I felt it." "So did you." For the first time, she looked away, her silence saying what she could not. The sound of the rain outside filled the room, soft but relentless. "Please leave," she whispered. Mark stood there for a long moment, then nodded. He turned and walked out, the echo of his footsteps trailing down the marble corridor. That night, the mansion felt emptier than ever. Eleanor sat alone in the library, the same place where they had once spoken about pretending. Now there was no need to pretend. She picked up her phone, scrolling through the flood of articles, comments, and photos. Among them was one image that made her posit it was from the gala weeks ago, showing Mark looking at her when she was not aware. There was no pretense in his eyes, only quiet admiration. She set the phone down and pressed her hand to her chest, as if trying to steady the ache there. Meanwhile, across town, Mark packed his few belongings into a small duffel bag. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked window. For the first time since he had stepped into Eleanor's world, he felt the weight of everything he was losing, not the wealth, not the mansion, but her. He whispered to the empty room, "I would have chosen you, even without the contract." The wind outside swallowed his words, carrying them into the night. 3 days passed after Mark left the Brooks estate, but the chaos did not fade. The tabloids kept feeding the flames, claiming Eleanor had manipulated a young man for her personal gain. The board of Brooks Holdings demanded a public statement, threatening a vote to remove her as chairwoman. On the morning of the meeting, the sky was gray, mirroring the heaviness in her chest. She stood before the mirror, straightening the diamond pin on her jacket, the same one Richard had given her years ago. For the first time in decades, she looked unsure of herself. When she arrived at the boardroom, the air was thick with tension. Reporters crowded the hallway, their voices echoing like waves. Inside, Harold Grant was already standing near the head of the table, papers spread out like weapons. "Mrs. Brooks," he began with a smug smile, "you have brought this company to shame. A staged marriage for publicity, financial misuse, and now scandal. The shareholders are losing trust. We demand your resignation." The room murmured in agreement. Eleanor looked around at the faces she had led for years, men who once praised her now turning away. Her voice was calm but firm. "You may question my choices, but never my integrity. I built this company from the ground up with my late husband, and I will not be dismissed by men who cannot see beyond gossip." Harold sneered. "Fine words, but the evidence says otherwise." Just then, the doors opened, every head turned. Mark walked in, rain still on his shoulders, holding a brown envelope. His sudden appearance drew a ripple of whispers. Eleanor's eyes widened, her breath catching. Mr. Davis, Harold said sharply, you no longer have any place here. Actually, I do, Mark replied. He stepped forward, placing the envelope on the table. Inside are the documents proving that the photo and the articles were planted by Mr. Grant himself. He hired a private investigator to follow us and sold the pictures to the media. Gasps filled the room. Harold's face drained of color. Eleanor's voice turned to steel. Is that true? Harold stammered, that is ridiculous, but before he could finish, another board member spoke up. The timestamps and payments match, Mrs. Brooks. It is all here. The room erupted into chaos as security escorted Harold out. Eleanor turned toward Mark, still stunned. Why did you come back? She asked softly. He looked at her, his expression steady. Because you taught me that real loyalty does not end when the contract does. She blinked, emotion flooding her usually composed face. You risked everything for this. You risked more when you trusted me, he said. Reporters outside caught the moment when Eleanor stepped to the podium, her hand slipping into Mark's. There was never a scandal, she told the cameras. There was only truth and I will not apologize for it. The flashbulbs exploded around them, but she no longer flinched. Standing beside him, she finally let the walls fall. A month after the storm had settled, the Brooks estate no longer echoed with reporters or restless whispers. The air felt lighter, like the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Eleanor stood by the window of her study, watching the morning sunlight spill across the garden where everything had begun. The roses had started to bloom again, pink and full, their petals glistening with dew. Mark entered quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. She turned and smiled faintly. You are early, she said. I thought you were meeting the foundation team this morning. I postponed, he replied, handing her the cup. There are more important things today. She raised an eyebrow. Such as? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a single piece of papier, a new agreement, handwritten this time. What is this? She asked, unfolding it carefully. The words were simple: one condition only, never stop choosing each other. Her lips parted, and for the first time, she laughed softly. You turned our marriage contract into a vow. It seemed fair, he said, smiling. We started with ink and signatures. I would rather end it with something real. Eleanor set the paper on her desk and looked at him for a long moment. You know, Mark, she said quietly, I thought I was rescuing you from debt. But you were the one who rescued me from loneliness. He stepped closer, taking her hand. Then maybe we saved each other. They stood there in the quiet morning, sunlight warming the edges of their faces. There was no need for more words. That afternoon, they walked through the gardens together, where the fountain glimmered under the spring sky. The estate no longer felt like a gilded prison but a home reborn. As they reached the pergola, Mark paused, pulling a small box from his pocket. Eleanor's breath caught when he opened Ida's simple gold band, elegant and unpretentious. I know we already have a legal marriage, he said softly, but I never gave you a real proposal. He knelt on one knee, his voice steady. Eleanor Brooks, will you marry me again without a contract, without conditions, just because I love you? Her eyes filled with tears, the kind she had not allowed herself in years. She nodded, whispering, yes. 1,000 times yes. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of roses around them. Somewhere in the distance, the church bells rang from the town below. Later, as they stood by the fountain, Eleanor looked up at the sky, her head resting against his shoulder. Do you ever wonder what people will say now? She asked. Mark smiled. Let them say whatever they want. They called it a contract once. Now they can call it what it truly is, a promise. The sun dipped lower, painting the garden in gold. Their hands intertwined, 2 lives once bound by obligation now free in love. The storm that had once surrounded them was gone, leaving behind only peace, and in that quiet, they finally understood that sometimes the best deals in life are the ones written by the heart.